Greetings, as I, Tentus Van Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome once more, all of you. Are you ready to learn about the Pathfinder role-playing game's lore? Well, I mean, you've joined me here for that. We're going to be diving deep into another ancestry in the world of Golarion that sometimes you can play, sometimes they can be antagonists. Regardless, they can be involved in your storytelling. So if you're joining me, of course, there are a lot of people joining me live. They're going to be over there, over in the chat. And for those of you who are joining me later on YouTube, hello. Remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that kind of great stuff. And my question for any of you out there today revolves around our topic. Have any of you dealt with the Caligni, or as they were called in first edition, the Dark Folk? I'll explain why that term is outdated, and there's actually an outdated occurrences that happened post into second edition. It hasn't been a lot of updates for core, but anyway, let's dive into it and start with, I will tell you some book sources, because I like kind of giving you a selection of various books that you can check out to enjoy all this material. And of course, Bestiary 5 is a great place to start, because this is where it's not that we didn't have, as they were in first edition, Dark Folk, but 5th edition, the 5th Bestiary is where we really identify them as more of a group. Also from first edition, Niddle Land of Shadows, Into the Darklands, The Cradle of the Night. Those are some great sources. When we get into Pathfinder's 2nd edition Bestiary, we start to develop them a lot more, and there has been some places where we've defined them post that. Let's now chat about them. Let's learn about them, because this is giving us some general information as what a Caligni is, but it really doesn't dive deep into it. So Caligni is a group of people, a group of beings, an umbrella for a term for humanoids that the surface dwellers have called Dark Folk. Though that Dark Folk is kind of a general term that's been used by surface dwellers, which really doesn't describe them and is kind of insulting to the Caligni. It's basically kind of a throwback word. And Caligni itself is referring to the genetic throwback among the kind who are more closely resembled to their Aslanti ancestors, because they're another group that, well, were Aslanti. We'll talk about that. But Caligni on a whole are separated into distinct forms, which share certain characteristics. They are basically subgroups, if you can think about it, from them. They're all humanoid creatures. They live underground. Stalkers are taller than both creepers and dancers. Most wear tattered gray or black clothing and basically hide their stuff within them. They all have very gaunt builds, pale complexions, white eyes. This is the generalization on most Dark Folk, and I will try to go into depths about at least mention the different types of Dark Folk before we end here. So what's their history? Where do they come from? Well, they are descended from an Aslanti settlement in Calignos, which was a trading outpost located in the Mindspan Mountains. Right the day before Earthfall, there were seers in Calignos that predicted the city's destruction, and basically the people fled to the Darklands for refuge. Earthfall collapsed the tunnels leading to the surface, and the citizens of Calignos were forced deeper underground. Of course, the Darklands is a terrifying and dangerous place if you're not prepared for it. And then more and more, the power of magic was used to survive, particularly magic found in the borders between light and darkness. Also, those that prayed for salvation had answers. Something answered them. A mysterious pantheon of demigods known as the Forsaken, who bestowed upon them cradles of the night. They are artifacts that were granted to the people of Calignos. They infuse the citizens of Calignos with their shadowy powerful and transform into this distinct race known as the Calignis. Since then, they have diversified physically between them, so there is this kind of evolution between the various groups of them. But the Cradles of the Night had influence on that. Basically, not everyone transformed the same when influenced by these powerful artifacts. Hence why there was also more separation because of that. Unknown to the Calignis, the Forsaken were planning on drawing upon their power to escape the Shadow Plane. But before this plan could be put in motion, the Forsaken suffered a mysterious calamity, shattering most of the Cradles of Night and leaving the Calignis once again without deities. However, only after a few years, the mysterious Obes appeared and offered them aid in exchange for devotion. The Obes are a different entity from the Plane of Shadow that do have strong ties to the Dark Folk, and they kind of give worship. Kind of Obes are almost like, I would, in comparison to like servants of a deity, like angels will serve more good aligned deities, or other celestials, where fiends will serve evil aligned deities, that kind of thing, except Obes served shadow deities. And they're connected to the god of shadows. Of course, the Caligni switched to these worshipping of them. And the Obes continued to diversify them. Basically, the core of what would be the subspecies, the sub-groups of the Caligni were brought about by the Cradles of the Night. But it was the Obes who effectively encouraged these subsets and changed them into various subspecies. In time, the tales of the Forsaken and the Surface were forgotten, and ancestral home of places like Kalgnos became an object of myth and legend in the Calignis. That's where we get to them today. Alright. They subsist on rotting meat and fungi, supplementing their diet by being able to absorb light in small amounts and somehow convert it into nutrition. Kind of a weird, mystical photosynthesis. Intense light blinds and sickens them, and overwhelms their ability to absorb it. And upon death, the stored light is released as a single blinding flash. This burst is said to have been part of the deal struck with the Forsaken demigods that shaped their underground adaptations. In return, a sliver of their soul's energy would fuel the Forsaken's pantheon. However, the Forsaken by all measure disappeared, and so the Caligni's soul energy no longer is tithed to them upon death. So, we get to the Age of Darkness, we've got the Caligari. This is when morphologically they begin separating into their distinct groups, including the intermediary Dark Dancers, the more numerous Dark Creepers, and the larger, more commanding Dark Stalkers. Caligari occasionally give birth to a child that is uncanny similar to humans of Kalgnos, before the home they were before they skipped the Darklands. These individuals call themselves Caligni, after their ancestral home that they've never seen. As they are born to Caligni couples, their children are often also Caligni, typically dark creepers. Caligni age roughly the same rate as Avorians, the half-elves. The Avorian. So yeah, that's some basics on the Caligni. And I will tell you, if you want to look into the various groups, the Caligari Caller, Creeper, Dancer, Slayer, and Stalkers. So I think the Creepers, Dancers, and Stalkers are the main types that we really talk about. The other ones might be class-based. Yeah. So the Caligni Stalkers, also known as Dark Stalkers to the Surface Dwellers, again, a kind of bastardization of what they really are and not really their term. There's plenty of species that are called something else by other people, unfortunately. They're smaller than Caligni Creepers. Stalkers and the Creepers have a physical dimorphic society as part of the wider population. Stalkers are often leaders of communities. They pair up with a Dark Caller to help guide their clan and use dark creepers as grunt work. They're about 6 feet tall, thin, about 100 pounds. There's the stalkers. The caller, which I'll be showing a picture of in a minute, are basically a religious leader or shaman. So when I talk about them, they're not necessarily a subgroup like some of the others, but I should chat about them for a moment. That are basically able to summon the creatures known as obes. They're angels. They also lead rituals of blanching, where they take a newborn and expose it to the touch of an obe. They're less physically altered than their cousins. The rest of the dark callers, the Caligni callers, are a lot more superstitious and oftentimes more cruel. They perform additional rituals to determine their causes, get information, to get passed to the Caligni stalkers, and help guide their clans. Caligni dancers, or dark dancers as sometimes called, are messengers, actors, entertainers, storytellers between the different clans and factions of the Caligni. Again, they're about halfling-sized humanoids, and like other Caligni, they have pallid skin, white eyes, emancipated appearance, dressed in a similar rags, only get up to about 60 pounds. Then, of course, you've got the Caligni Creeper. They're the most common of the Caligni and adapt to the roguish attitude of their society. They are the sibling race to the Stalkers, who dwell in the Darklands. And the Creepers treat the Stalkers akin to, treating like living gods. Creepers are also small-sized, about halfling-sized. Same kind of appearance, about 4 feet tall. And they have an unpleasant odor due to the custom of never removing their clothing. When garments become worn, they wear an additional layer on top. So yeah, those are, generally speaking, the different groups of Caligni you're going to kind of encounter. Okay. Let's move on and show a picture of a Caligni caller here as we chat about their society for just a minute, because it is important to dive deeper into that society. So, when a Caligni is born, it is celebrated by many different ones, but usually annoys the power that be in Caligni society, whether obes or darkstalker or Caligni stalkers. Because of this, Calignis who do not leave their birthplace tend to suffer from unfortunate accidents before adulthood. Basically, everybody's glad when someone's born, but the people in charge aren't happy when someone is born and will oftentimes arrange their death. Strangely, it's a weird dynamic. Calignis who foresee this seek homes elsewhere in the Darklands or in shadowy Niddle. We're the only surface nation whose environment is friendly towards their naturally light-sensitive Caligni, and where it's easy for them to integrate into the darkness-worshipping society. New Kalgnos, the southwestern district of the Needlese capital, Pangolius, is intensively inhabited by Calignis who have put in considerable effort to replicate Kalgnos from what the Caligni scholars knew about the Aslanti cities. It's doubtful the architecture traditions of New Kalgnos are authentic to Aslant, but they have become deeply integrated into the Calignis that grow up there and know. Since Calignis do not breed true, they usually prefer to adopt abandoned Caligni children or take them from other families. They reveal Kalgnos and consider themselves separate and distinct from Calignis. This is a little bit of confusing language. Don't mind that. The Shadow Cavern in Nidal, which is connected to Narvoth, are home to a thriving market of Caligni infants, either given up or stolen from Caligni. Remember, there's Caligni who are born from the specific Caligni lesser groups, and I think that's what they're talking about. Okay? We're talking about the Caligni that look like Aslantes. Alright? So they don't breed true. Alright? Yes. And so, when they try to take others of their kind, their subspecies of Caligni, from the other Caligni, because they feel like they should be with them, and there is a market for that. That can be bought or adopted by a Nidalese Caligni. The children gain families, underground Calignis give up their potential source of trouble, and brokers turn a profit. Because remember, I talked about that's the Caligni which is disliked and can be gotten rid of. Yeah, they're called the exact same thing, so it's a little confusing, and I'm trying my best to keep in my own brain from saying it right. So yes, we have all the Caligni subspecies. They occasionally give birth to these Caligni, which are basically look very much human, Aslanti, with some little bits of them. They're disliked by the societies, the people in charge. They're often killed. They leave. They've been the ones that have formed new Calgnos on the surface. Not to say that there aren't other Caligni subspecies that might not be there, but yes, those are the Pacific ones that are the main group there. And then they have that market for basically smuggling out Caligni, Caligni Aslanti, I'll call them. Caligni ancestor, maybe. Caligni throwbacks, because they're genetically throwbacks to their ancestors. Maybe. The Caligni Aslant forms get them to the surface, basically. And that's the entire thing. That's why there's picking up abandoned ones when parents don't want trouble with people in charge, take them from families that might get them killed and stuff like that, get them from this market. It's an unfortunate thing that, yes, these children, these Caligni Aslants, which is not really their term, but I'm saying that to specify the difference in this video so you understand it, are not going to be treated well by the societies in the Shadowlands, in the underground. And it requires unfortunate, very terrible terms in order to get them to a safe place sometimes. It's a weird situation where the society they're in is not going to treat them well. So, is it best? No. I don't think there's any real good on any side in this case. So, yeah. So, I talked about the general Caligni as an entire group, the worship as a whole. Some Caligni do go into worshiping Norgriber or Sivat. Those whose homes lie below the surface world of Nidal might follow the nation's official deity, Zon Cathon. There's also worshippers of Noctunla, Pharasma, or even Desna. That's not unheard of against less malign Caligni. As a group, again. They all share a common language called Caligni, too. Alright. So I've kind of specified most of where they are on Golarion. Of course, the primary live in the caverns of Nalvoth, including the city of Svernspun, which has its famous slave markets, and the Hringar metropolis of Hagigraph. They're rare in the deep caverns of Sekamenia, and a small section of the Drathanlar city of Dwemovil is inhabited by Calignis. While others dwell in this again, there's some changes here for the remaster project, so because I mentioned a drow city of Zernikanen, and they've changed too. There's something else or don't exist. They're more the Cavern Elves now. The Islandiria, which are a different thing and changed, so some of these details are kind of still being updated in the core project. Just keep that in mind. In the Vaults of Orv, Calignis inhabit the land of Black Blood. Near to the surface, there is a sizable population that exists in the shadow caverns between Nidal's Erskwood and the abandoned dwarven Zulurket mines of Capitish Barrier Wall Mountains, and below the island of Antlers Rock in the lands of the Linrobe Kings. Now, Though less common in the inner sea regions, Calignis are also present in the caverns below the continent of TNZ, especially in the underground community known as the Deep Market, below the sprawling metropolis of Goka. So they're also in TNZ. And when we get the TNZ book, we might have more in this region here too. It hasn't come out yet as the timing of this video. But there you go. There's the Caligni. I hope you enjoyed learning about them. They're an interesting group because they do have this dynamic. They were beings which effectively were human, but they've been transformed radically by a combination of, well, an ancient artifact from beings that are like demigods that granted them reprieve in this Darklands where they were honestly threatened with death, destruction, pain, suffering, a slow death because they're creatures that were surface dwellers forced into the Darklands. They were saved by the Forsaken. But the Forsaken just disappeared. Their attempts to free from the Shadow Realm. I think there probably is more lore on the Forsaken if you want to look into them, but that's what we're not really going to go into today, of course. Nonetheless, with them kind of vanished, well, they were still left alone. And then another being from the Plane of Shadows, now that they had these deep connections to the Plane of Shadows, came to them and was like, we can save you. And basically had, honestly, controlled breeding programs. That's why we have, like, 5 subspecies of Caligni. Including, I guess we can call them by their different terms. As a whole, they are the species of Caligni. And then we have, like, Caligni True. And then things like the Caligni Stalkers, the Caligni Creepers, Caligni Crawlers, all those other subgroups. Caligni Dancers. Which are still Caligni, but not Caligni the same way. You know, they've been bred apart. The compatibility is questionable too. And, you know, it's the other thing too that Caligni True do not breed true. You know, we keep that in mind that they don't. They usually have children that are Caligni, but they're often things like Dark Creepers. Caligni Creepers. The more numerous one. It's an interesting thing to see that also their society isn't necessarily like an evil society. Certainly, it's a society of the Darklands. They are a little bit more violent, a little bit more standoffish. Probably deal with a lot more external threats. A little xenophobic. And they serve, unfortunately, fairly dark creatures. The Obes are beings, outsiders, that are inherently kind of evil. And they serve evil demigods of the Shadow Planes. So, the Caligni themselves aren't really that way, but they're drawn that way by their leadership, by their religious leaders. And yes, it is seen that other religions are coming into their society, and some of them are more neutral, which drive individuals out. And certainly some aren't. But there is also this connection with the surface. The country of Needle, where we see them. And that's an important thing, too. Because it means that there's a chance for countries to develop. And yes, Needle is not necessarily the greatest place to be, you know, granted, but honestly speaking, you could be in a worse place. So, the Caligni, as an entire people, as all of the subspecies together, have chances to develop but certainly those in the Darklands and under the call of their wicked angels, the Obes, might not as much as those that are on the surface or those that are separated out from this, those that are finding things. And certainly the situation with Caligni true. There are these Caligni that look pretty much human. They just have a terrible situation for them. And the entire smuggling children out of that area, most of them would die otherwise. So it's such a weird thing to think about, that it's just such a terrible situation on so many ends. But it exists in their society, and they have to deal with it. Anyway, that'll be it for today. I could go on about this for a little while longer. I don't want to dive too much into all of it. It's a complex society, complex situation that is ever evolving. And again, as I noted kind of towards the beginning, I'll tell you here, there are some things here that have updated between the various editions. And certainly there is a little tiny bits of information that's being updated through the core remaster project. So most of this is fairly accurate for what it is. But that's the Caligni. Hope you enjoyed all this. If you want to see more things live over on Twitch, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, the backup days when I talk about tabletop. I've got my discussion show on Saturdays at 6 p.m. EST, discussing tabletop, news of the week, deeper discussion topics in the tabletop world. A live play of some Pathfinder, first edition, on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. EST. Do some gaming streams also over on that channel, usually Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. And everything tabletop related goes up on YouTube if you're not catching it there. I've got social media, Discord, Twitter, link down below, and that's all my shout-outs. I try to keep it quick and simple, and just give you a little bit at the end. Alright, everybody. I'm going to go. I'm going to say to all of you out there, I hope you enjoyed learning about the Caligni and their situation. And we'll learn more about various other different ancestries and species that exist on Golarion and their uniqueness that they bring to the entire melting pot, which is all the intelligent species on Golarion. And until the next time we talk about that or any other tabletop lore, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.